The gas company tells you it's natural gas, so that sounds great, but that's not the whole story.
There is still new holes being drilled for oil and gas, and this is very dangerous.
All of this fracking, the plastic industry sees it as a godsend.
Being a part of the gas testing has made me aware that it's time for a change, that there are things we can do.
We want to be able to find, where these high concentrations are so that we can try to make change on how these companies are handling these plastic pellets.
What I most want is for everyone to see oil and gas through my lens.
Every step that everyone takes, it all adds up.
I think natural gas more of maybe something that's exhausted by biofuels.
I know it's naturally cleaner to use compared to other fossil fuels.
From what I've seen, it looks to be more environmentally friendly. That's what they advertise it as.
I might have learned that it's less of a pollutant, but that also could be misinformation.
It's a lot more tangible to see how oil can be more polluting.
I think, is natural gas better? I'm not sure, but yeah.
People around the world seem to think of natural gas as a cleaner fuel alternative. But the fact is that the methane that's in natural gas is up to 80 times worse for the planet in the short term. Natural gas is still extracted from the earth. It can heat a building, it can cook your food, it can even make plastics. But the problem is every step of the way between when we get natural gas out of the ground to how we use it can be toxic for both people and the planet.
It really has been a marketing push to have this idea that fossil gas, termed natural gas, is cleaner, is not harmful, and is something that we can use as we try and progress to moving away from oil. And it's just a fallacy. It's just not true.
Natural gas has long been marketed as a clean alternative to other fossil fuels like oil and coal. Since as early as 1988, the natural gas industry has referred to its product as a, quote, bridge fuel, a temporary, less harmful alternative as the world sought other, longer-lasting solutions to climate change. These phrases clicked with members of both political parties.
I think the natural gas boom is good. It's an important bridge fuel.
Natural gas should be a bridge to renewables.
Focus on using natural gas as a bridge fuel.
Bridge fuel. Bridge fuel.
Bridge fuel.
If extracted safely, it's the bridge fuel that can power our economy with less of the carbon pollution that causes climate change.
Very early on, this idea of natural gas or gas being a bridge fuel came up because from a CO2 perspective, that would be the least amount of carbon dioxide when you burn a BTU or an amount of gas compared to coal or oil. That is a very myopic look at this issue.
It is true that burning natural gas generates half the CO2 emissions as burning coal. But that does not take into account the CO2 emissions generated from transporting, processing, and extracting the fuel.
There's a lot of CO2 that goes into what they call that upstream, what happens before you use it.
It also fails to take into account another important greenhouse gas, methane. While it doesn't last as long in the atmosphere as CO2, it is much more potent in the short term.
So if you think about carbon dioxide being one blanket around the climate, when you compare that to methane over its decade-long lifetime, it will be the equivalent of 80 blankets on the climate. So now you've stacked all these blankets. They won't live as long as CO2, but their impact now is far greater.
Methane leaks all throughout the process of producing natural gas, which means it may not be cleaner than other fossil fuels after all.
There are circumstances that make gas be as bad for the climate, as dirty for the climate as coal. I recently co-authored a study with colleagues from Harvard, from Duke, NASA Jet Propulsion Lab, and RMI. We found that emissions of methane from the gas supply chain that were as low as 0.2% leakage, 0.2% leakage, could be on par with coal.
Again, methane is 80 times more powerful than CO2 over a 20-year period. So even a low leakage rate like 0.2% can have an outsized climate impact in the short term. And there's growing evidence that gas today leaks much more than that threshold. Recent aerial and satellite surveys suggest that leakage rates range from 0.6% at newer operations designed specifically to produce gas to 66% at older offshore oil and gas platforms in the Gulf of Mexico.
So that's called into question whether gas is a safe bridge between where we are now and where we want to be.
Despite these concerns, the industry is doubling down on natural gas, not just as a bridge to renewables, but the destination. According to a blog post by industry group American Petroleum Institute, executives were quoted as saying, "It's not a bridge, but a foundation, and will be a foundation for years to come." Natural gas is a foundation fuel for prosperity around the world. Natural gas is a foundational tool, not a transitional fuel. In 2022, a congressional investigation on fossil fuel disinformation revealed that, quote, despite public rhetoric that natural gas products are a bridge in transition to cleaner energy, major oil and gas companies are trying to position fossil fuels as long-term assets for many decades to come. In fact, BP even referred to natural gas as a destination fuel in several internal documents unearthed in the investigation.
Gas!
The fossil fuel industry has had success framing gas positively, not just in a political context, but also in a cultural one, especially when it comes to using gas in the home.
What we're doing when we're using a gas stove is essentially combusting a fossil fuel right in the heart of our homes. We think of this as a normal thing to do. And why is that? And one of the reasons is because the gas industry has worked really hard to convince people, to persuade people to love their gas stoves.
The world of tomorrow is cooking with gas.
Gas cooks! It heats automatically. Why not have in your own kitchen the same fast, cool, clean, controlled gas cooking that fine chefs insist on?
It has been a campaign including celebrities and even sports.
Records show that the gas industry has spent millions of dollars on advertising and marketing campaigns through product placement deals, through celebrity tie-ins, to convince people and to persuade people to cook on gas. For example, even Julia Child, America's favorite TV chef in the 1970s, at the end of every show was the message saying, with special thanks to the American Gas Association. But also it used sports stars to promote its message. A Southern California gas company actually provided the gas for the Olympic flame for the 1984 Olympic Games.
But in the 1970s and early 80s, a growing body of scientific evidence emerged showing links between gas stove emissions and respiratory illness, some gaining national attention and prompting calls for regulation.
And in response, the gas industry started funding its own epidemiological studies.
A report by the Climate Investigation Center suggests that the gas industry borrowed big tobacco's tactics to manufacture and magnify controversy over links between gas stove emissions and respiratory illness.
And that it did this using the same laboratories, the same consultants, and the same statistical analysts as its tobacco counterparts.
The industry is still fighting over the public perception of gas stoves today, as more scientific research has emerged on their potential negative health impacts.
We see like paid Instagram partnerships with influencers today who are cooking with gas and have many, many followers following their recipes, their lifestyle, continuing to perpetuate this image of a gas stove as something desirable.
There are controversies over the health impacts of natural gas far beyond the kitchen, such as environmental justice concerns along the supply chain, including at power plants that generate electricity from natural gas. But at Ravenswood Generating Station in Queens, New York, environmentalists and public health advocates scored a recent victory.
There are plans to convert this from being fossil gas burning to being a clean energy hub.
It's a change that could help solve long-standing health and environmental justice concerns associated with the plant, which is located across the street from a large public housing complex. Advocates hope that the plant's transition plans can offer a blueprint for other cities and states that want to move towards renewables.
So that's just one example of, something that's actually underway as we speak. New York City has dug in, and we know that we can do this.
But achieving that transition elsewhere won't be easy.
The work of changing the trajectory of harm, that our fossil fuel infrastructure, is causing both our people and planet is a challenge. I think what's happening right here is one example of this. This idea that we can replace one of the biggest generating plants that's burning gas into clean and renewable energy. This didn't happen overnight, and a lot of things do need to come together. The commitment to making the change is what is necessary, and the political will, and pushing back against the interests that really have a lot invested in the status quo.
In this level of climate crisis that we are experiencing, there is still new holes being drilled for oil and gas, and this is very dangerous.
Gas can't leak. If gas leaks in the supply chain, it can be as bad as coal.
Methane is an accelerant. It's like throwing gasoline on a fire.
Whether we know it or not, most Americans rely on natural gas on a daily basis. We use it to generate electricity, warm our homes, and cook our food, and even make materials like plastic and clothing. But what is natural gas? Where does it come from in the first place? And how do we get it? Natural gas is mostly methane, a potent greenhouse gas that's become a growing concern as the climate crisis intensifies. It also includes air pollutants known to cause harm to human health. Most of the natural gas that we extract is trapped in small pores deep underground, and we get it through a process commonly known as fracking. And as gas is fracked and processed, it has a tendency to escape, as seen here.
Methane escapes willingly, and it escapes both intentionally and unintentionally, and it escapes intermittently and persistently.
Those leaks can happen in different ways. Small amounts of methane can leak out of equipment fixtures during normal operations and add up. Methane can be released when systems fail, and methane can be released by operators, whether intentionally or unintentionally. For example, flaring, a process designed to burn off methane and convert it into CO2, can actually end up releasing methane into the air if the flame doesn't burn efficiently, or if it goes out, or if it doesn't get lit. Methane can also be vented into the air for safety and operational reasons.
They are things that put out tons of methane. Those super-emitting events are thought to be the majority of the problem.
A Guardian analysis of data from Kairos, a company tracking greenhouse gas emissions, found more than 1,000 super emitter events worldwide in 2022 alone, with most coming from oil and gas sites. The worst of those leaked methane at a rate equivalent to 67 million running cars, according to The Guardian.
Methane's invisible, so you're not going to see this happen.
But there are ways to make gas visible.
The way that we measure gas, because it is invisible, is through instrumentation that can see it with its light signature.
And there are different tools used to visualize and measure gas: satellites, aircraft, and even handheld cameras.
The satellites historically have been operated by governments like NASA.
Today, nonprofits like Carbon Mapper and Environmental Defense Fund, or EDF, are getting involved in satellite operations as well.
Nonprofit operators, Carbon Mapper, EDF, are really important because they're telling the story more from how do you stop the leak?
Then there are aircraft that can fly over a particular region to study it closer.
The aircraft are mostly operated by academic outfits with input from nonprofits like Carbon Mapper and also from NASA. And they actually can really get down to that next level of not only seeing things on the ground, but seeing them day to day and seeing them hour to hour.
Then there are the handheld cameras.
They can really zero in on a certain operation and monitor it.
Sharon Wilson has dedicated the last decade to doing just that.
Oil and gas has been able to tell the public that methane gas is clean energy. And the only reason that they can say that is because it's invisible and you can't see the pollution. Optical gas imaging, also known as OGI, makes visible the normally invisible pollution coming from oil and gas.
For the last 3 years, she's worked with another climate activist, Miguel Escoto, to document emissions from oil and gas facilities in the Permian Basin, a major production hub in West Texas and East New Mexico.
The Permian should be described as a climate bomb because of the disproportionate impact that this single region has on the global climate crisis. According to Climate Trace, the Permian is the #1 source of greenhouse gas emissions in the planet. It's important to visualize the pollution of the oil and gas industry because that pollution affects us all. But apart from the broad global scale of these climate implications, there's also immediate local effects.
The methane doesn't come up by itself. It comes up with a lot of other gases that we call hitchhikers, and those are volatile organic compounds like benzene, ethylbenzene, toluene, xylene, things that are very harmful to human health.
Those hitchhiker pollutants, even in small amounts, can cause premature birth, asthma, cancer, and other adverse health impacts, according to a PSC for Healthy Energy systematic review of the scientific literature. That review also found risks are higher the closer emissions occur to human population, meaning workers at natural gas plants and nearby communities are at particular risk.
It's very easy to ignore things you can't see. I think that measurement and knowing a problem, being able to quantify it and locate it, is the beginning of solving the problem.
How to solve the emissions problem is a subject of some debate. Industry groups like the American Petroleum Institute point to efforts to better understand, detect, and mitigate emissions by developing new technologies and practices. One such effort is the Environmental Partnership, a coalition of more than 100 oil and gas companies making voluntary commitments to reduce emissions through improvements to facility design, operations, detection, measurement, and reporting. The federal government has also paid closer attention to methane in recent years. For the first time ever, it plans to directly impose a charge on greenhouse gas emissions.
So there's a methane fee in the Inflation Reduction Act that puts a fee on any methane leakage above a certain threshold from the oil and gas industry.
But some environmentalists say the production of gas is inherently incompatible with solving the emissions problem.
I've been hearing since early 2000s, don't worry about the emissions, we can solve that problem. We've got technology that's going to solve that problem. And I keep proving that they have not solved the problem and that their technology is unreliable. There's no way currently that the oil and gas industry can produce oil and gas without pollution.
We are not in a position right now where we can regulate this industry in a way that doesn't harm the climate. The public needs to understand that the most important thing we can do to fix the climate crisis is to stop the drilling, the fracking, the oil and gas extraction.
A recent report from the International Energy Agency includes a similar warning. attempts by governments to prioritize domestic production must recognize the risk of locking in emissions that could push the world over the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold. But in places like the Permian Basin, oil and gas production is actually expanding.
So in our most recent trip to the Permian, we saw oil and gas facilities that were polluting. And we saw a lot of new drilling rigs.
Gas production in the Permian Basin has steadily increased over the last decade, hitting an all-time high in 2022.
This last trip, I was in the Permian Basin for several days. It was just the same thing that I have seen over and over again now for almost 10 years. It just was depressing. I can't stop just because I get upset. I cannot stop. There's too much at stake.
If we defuse the Permian climate bomb, the entire world benefits. We would be diffusing a major source of global climate emissions. And that makes the Permian an issue that the entire world should care about.
We should not be expanding oil and gas, and we need to rapidly and justly transition to clean, renewable energy. What I most want is for everyone to see oil and gas through my lens. And if that happens, I feel like we will have a transition. People will get angry and they'll realize that we need to move forward.
Natural gas is best known as a fuel for things like heaters, stoves, and power plants. But it's not just a source of energy. It's also a raw material for all sorts of everyday products. Things like detergent, polyester fabric, and fertilizer all come from chemicals derived from natural gas. And one of the most important petrochemical products today is plastic. Global plastic production grew tenfold between 1970 and 2015. And the World Economic Forum says it will almost quadruple by 2050.
Plastics are made from gas and oil, so the plastic industry is the fossil fuel industry.
The rise of fracking in the U.S. has led to an abundance of natural gas and its byproducts, fueling the growth of domestic plastic production.
Most food packaging is polyethylene, and polyethylene comes from ethane, which was originally a waste product of the fracking process.
U.S. ethane production has climbed steadily since 2013, reaching a record high in 2023.
The petrochemical industry found that they could turn this waste gas into a new product in the form of single-use plastics.
In fact, since 2010, gas-linked U.S. plastic and chemical projects have attracted more than $200 billion in investment, according to the American Chemistry Council and Industry Group.
And so now we're seeing a build-out of plastic production infrastructure.
But that build-out is not without its costs. At every step of the plastic production process, from fracking to petrochemical processing and beyond, there's potential for pollution. In a 2021 report, advocacy group Beyond Plastics estimated annual greenhouse gas emissions from the entire plastic supply chain.
And what we found was that plastic in the US is on track to outpace coal emissions by the end of this decade. 90% of the emissions of plastic production are released into just 18 communities. And these communities are almost always communities of color and/or they're low-income communities.
In addition to greenhouse gases, plastic manufacturers emit hazardous air pollutants linked to health impacts, such as nervous system problems, reproductive problems, and even cancer, according to the Center for International Environmental Law.
So there's an inequality at play here where it's somehow acceptable for some communities to be burdened with the pollution.
Emissions aren't the only pollution concern when it comes to the petrochemical plants that make plastic. There's also their end product, tiny plastic pellets known to some as nurdles.
Nurdles are lentil-sized pieces of plastic that then are shipped to another facility to be made into actual plastic products.
It's estimated that 230,000 metric tons of nurdles enter the waterways every year.
Nurdles are like glitter. They just get everywhere.
The pellets have been called toxic sponges for their ability to absorb and spread harmful pollutants and bacteria. And nurdle pollution can harm wildlife. Birds, fish, and sea turtles have all been known to eat nurdles, mistaking them for a natural food source. If they eat enough pellets, these animals can feel full without actually being nourished, eventually leading to starvation.
Pellets.
Diane Wilson, a retired fourth-generation fisherwoman turned environmental activist, lives near one of the largest plastic plants in the country, Formosa Plastics in Point Comfort, Texas. In 2017, she led a lawsuit against the company over their pellet discharges, gathering evidence to support her case.
I bought this old used kayak for about $70 and I put it in the water, and I literally started trying to track down their discharges. This was a part of our gathering of evidence at Formosa's, at their stormwater outfalls and at the industrial wastewater out of Lavaca, Matagorda Bay. I started seeing all the pellets and all the powder that was coming out. There are pellets all over this area here. And me and a handful of workers, we went out every single day and checked probably a 20-mile area around the beaches, around the inlets, around the boat ramps, and I kayaked into the outfalls, and we collected over 2,500 samples.
She argued that the pellets could harm the local wildlife and, in turn, the local fishing, shrimping, and oystering communities that rely on that wildlife for their livelihoods. The federal judge overseeing the case agreed, ruling in her favor.
The federal judge said that the violations were enormous, that Formosa was a persistent violator.
Formosa settled the lawsuit in 2019. Agreeing to pay $50 million into a trust establishing a local fishing cooperative, as well as supporting environmental projects and research. The company also committed to zero discharge of plastics in the environment. Wilson won the 2023 Goldman Environmental Prize for her work. Today, she continues to survey local waters and adjacent vegetation for nurdles.
Thousands of them.
Without the dedication of activists like Wilson, who spent years documenting nurdles at one single plant, it can be tricky to figure out where nurdles are coming from and who is responsible for cleaning them up. Marine biologist Jace Tunnell set out to help solve this problem with a citizen science effort called Nurdle Patrol.
We have volunteers going out and looking for how many pellets they can find in 10 minutes. So we're going to do a survey today to see how many we can find in a 10-minute period. Okay, here's a nurdle. Another nurdle here. We're not trying to pick all of this up. We're really trying to get an indication of where the problem areas are.
Nurdle Patrol began in 2018 as a Facebook group. Now it's in its 5th year, with more than 9,000 volunteers who've conducted roughly 20,000 surveys.
People can go out. They can do a 10-minute survey looking for how many plastic pellets they find at their local beach, river, or lake shoreline. They can include that data into this database, and it shows up on a map. We want to be able to find, where these high concentrations are so that we can try to make policy and change on how these companies are handling these plastic pellets.
Approaches to solving the pellet problem vary. There are industry-led, voluntary programs to reduce pellet loss, as well as proposals to strengthen regulations around pellet discharge on the federal and state levels. Then there's the more fundamental solution of reducing overall plastic production in the U.S., which would not only tackle pellet loss, but also pollution along the entire supply chain, including the extraction and processing of natural gas.
Pretty much anything that is a single-use plastic didn't exist 50 years ago. And there are alternatives out there that we can go back to. The first one on the list is reuse and refill infrastructure. We need to make less plastic. We need to stop the practice of extracting oil and gas if we want to have a livable planet. And I know that sounds extreme, but that is what the science is telling us. And we have to reckon with reality here. We have alternatives to plastic. We have alternatives to fossil fuels. What matters is the political will to get it done, and that starts with the grassroots. Community opposition is really where this fight is happening right now.
Most people don't think twice about using gas in their homes.
They're burning it for heating in the winter. They're burning it in their water heater. Maybe they've got a dryer drying their clothes, or they're cooking on it.
But behind those everyday encounters are unseen risks.
The gas company tells you it's natural gas, so that sounds great, but that's not the whole story.
All of these years, I've been living in a house with gas, and now I'm being told that gas is dangerous to my health, dangerous to the environment.
Gas is contributing to climate change, it's contributing to human health harms, and there's a real prospect that it will continue contributing to higher energy costs.
So how does gas pose these risks? To answer that question, we need to understand a bit about how gas gets into our homes in the first place.
Running down the street in your neighborhood, under the asphalt, there is a gas line, a gas main, which is a big pipe that's bringing gas to all the different homes in that neighborhood.
Those pipes running underground are aging.
So while the average is 30 plus years, a state like Massachusetts, more than a quarter of the pipes are over 50 years old. And in a place like Chicago, just a couple years ago, they pulled a pipe out of the ground that was built before the Civil War.
Aging pipes mean more gas leaks, which pose climate risks.
Natural gas is almost entirely methane, and methane is tremendously more powerful than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. So even a little bit of leakage can have a really big impact in driving climate change.
The Environmental Protection Agency estimates that in 2021, more than 500,000 metric tons of methane leaked from the pipelines that deliver gas to homes. That's roughly equivalent to the annual greenhouse gas emissions of 3 million cars.
In DC, the gas pipes are over 100 years old. Even our church, which is right up the street, you could just stand there and smell the gas in front of that.
In our nation's capital, an interfaith environmental coalition called Beyond Gas DC has organized a citizen science effort to track the problem of gas leaks from pipes.
This is not academics or people who work for a scientific organization. It's just everyday people going around doing the testing.
Rosalie and Charlene Pierce are volunteers involved in the Beyond Gas DC Coalition's work.
We're going to test the gas in the street to see how much gas is really being emitted into our atmosphere. We're going to test it with an instrument.
That instrument is an industry-grade gas detector. Volunteers insert the nozzle into utility access caps. The instrument draws in air, then measures the amount of methane. From February of 21 to February of 22, volunteers like Pierce and Lee took methane measurements all around Washington, D.C.
And what we found was more than 400 leaks, almost 15 of which were at the level at which they could potentially explode. And I want to emphasize this was by no means comprehensive. I mean, we found 400 leaks in a tiny, tiny sample of less than 1%, maybe even less than 1/10 of 1% of all of these gas caps across DC.
Academic and government studies have confirmed that DC has a gas leaks problem. In 2021, the DC Department of Energy and Environment found leaks in more than 3,000 locations in the city. DC isn't the only city with this problem. A 2019 study found 6 U.S. cities, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York, Providence, and Boston, had methane emissions more than twice the EPA's estimates. And from 2013 to 2018, the Environmental Defense Fund, Google Earth Outreach, and Colorado State University conducted a snapshot study of gas leaks in various cities using street view cars equipped with methane analyzers. And no surprise, when sampling locations in different cities, older pipes leaked more than newer ones. But replacing old pipes is expensive.
What we've seen is a big increase in the rate of replacement and the rate of spending on the system. So in the 2000s, across the country, utilities spent maybe $5 billion a year doing this type of upgrade and maintenance. The last few years, we're up over $20 billion. So we've more than quadrupled in that time frame.
And it's customers who typically foot the bill for these increased infrastructure costs. In addition to cost considerations, replacing aging pipes also raises climate concerns, since installing new infrastructure locks in decades of its use, which in this case equates to burning more fossil fuel. The climate risks posed by leaky pipes aren't the only concern with gas infrastructure. Gas appliances in the home, like stoves and heaters, can emit health-harming pollutants.
Natural gas is mostly methane, but the parts that are not methane include some other things that could be harmful for us as well. And a recent study showed that benzene is one of those, for instance.
A peer-reviewed study conducted by Stanford researchers and published in Environmental Science and Technology found for the first time that gas stoves can contribute to elevated concentrations of benzene, which is a carcinogen. In some kitchens, the levels of benzene were on par with what you find in secondhand smoke. The study also found that people outside the kitchen can be exposed to elevated levels of benzene for hours after the stove is turned off. Benzene isn't the only health-harming pollutant associated with burning gas. There's also nitrogen dioxide. According to the American Lung Association, nitrogen dioxide causes a range of harmful effects on the lungs. Scientific evidence suggests that exposure to NO2 could likely cause asthma in children. It's also a precursor to other health-harming pollutants like ozone and particulate matter. In Washington, D.C., neighborhood researchers are now turning their attention to these gas stove emissions, testing for nitrogen dioxide in their own kitchens.
Generally, you cut the stove on and have it on for about 15 minutes before. Set it at 350, and then with the instrument, you just go in and measure. The final reading is 86, and that's after 30 minutes.
How bad was it in your kitchen today?
The last reading was 86, so that's all within the moderate level.
Okay, so that's a lot better than a lot of kitchens. Some of them, they're double, triple, even quadruple that.
As of November 2023, the group tested roughly 160 residential kitchens in D.C. Of those, about 2/3 had levels of nitrogen dioxide at or above the EPA standard.
The EPA's limit for nitrogen dioxide in outdoor air is 100 parts per billion, and we're seeing double, triple, even almost quadruple that inside people's homes. They are well exceeding the outdoor air standards indoors. And one of the things we learned from the COVID-19 pandemic is that when you have nasty stuff floating around in the air, it's a lot worse indoors than it is outdoors. And we are having levels of nitrogen dioxide that are totally unsafe in people's kitchens every day.
Being a part of the gas testing has made me aware that it's time for a change, that there are things we can do.
We've got things an individual family can do, and we've got things a city or a state might do. For an individual family, we're definitely seeing this growing interest in getting off of gas. For a city or a state, we're seeing growing interest in planning a well-managed transition for this gas system. What if, instead of digging up the street, pulling out the old pipe, putting in a brand new pipe and connecting it to everyone else and perpetuating the system, what if we could just close the valve and switch all those customers to something else?
Advocates say moving away from gas will help the environment, indoor air quality, and health.
We think the place to start is electrifying the homes of low and moderate income residents. And here in DC, we have legislation called the Healthy Homes Act, which would do just that.
Introduced in February of 2023, the city's Healthy Homes Act aims to supplement federal support for home electrification with local funds.
She's supporting DC's proposed Healthy Homes Act that will help lower-income residents move from gas to electric in their homes.
It would cover the full cost of removing fossil fuel appliances, furnaces, and other equipment from people's homes and replace them with clean and efficient electric alternatives.
In 2018, DC passed the Clean Energy Act, which aims for 100% renewable energy by 2032. Advocates argue electrifying homes is a key first step in achieving that goal.
People have said to me, oh, I hear that you're going to make people get rid of this gas stove. We're not going to make anybody do anything.
Some people accept it and appreciate it, but then other people are not accepting of it. We're not trying to make anybody give anything up. We basically want to educate people, about gas and the impacts of gas. So it varies, but I still feel it's part of the educational process. It's going to take work. It's going to take education where the people have to learn to advocate for themselves and ask for things. But it's also going to take the local governments and state governments helping to push through what we're asking for.
Did you ever think you'd be a gas educator?
Not at 75. No, I didn't. But I'm glad that I am. And I'm glad that I'm part of that movement to go beyond gas.